If you could kind of go back and tell yourself when you were, I don't know, 25 or something, one piece of advice about leadership, about creating environments for success, whatever it may be, what would you tell yourself?
Well, I'm going to tell a story
Awesome.
to do that, and it's a story that was sort of imposed on me. I already mentioned the fact that I sort of have this collegial and congenial nature. So even a pleaser is my natural, kind of orientation. And I've mentioned him many times in the podcast, but Fred Smith was my boss, and sometimes he struggled with that because he thought I wasn't tough enough when the accountability mattered the most. And I told the fat finger thing here earlier in our conversation. And so he gave me an assignment, which I found to be fascinating. And I can't tell you how many times I've asked others to embark on this same assignment. But he handed me at the time a DVD, and it was a regular movie DVD, and it was the movie 12 O'Clock High. And it was a movie about World War II. And if you read the jacket cover, it was this melodrama starring Gregory Peck, about this group of misfits. He asked me to watch the movie and write a report on what I saw, and particularly to pay attention to General Savage, who was the character that Gregory Peck played. And it was life changing for me. I'm not going to give away all of the clues, but the burden of leadership that the general assumed through this process, when the stakes could hardly have been higher for the world's freedom, for everything else. Now, this is not a true story, but it emulates a true story. And I found out after the fact. I was talking to one of my professor friends at Harvard, who was an Army colonel, and then became a PhD, but he graduated from West Point. And I told him that Fred had given me this DVD to watch and asked me to go study it. And he goes, "You're kidding, right?" And I said, "Of course, no, I wouldn't kid about that. I mean, it's not even funny." And he goes, "Well, we used 12 O'Clock High as a specific course at West Point on leadership characteristics and on adapting yourself to the needs of the situation." And what I would tell the audience here is, if you're willing to do this, and I've had a lot of my team members that I've not, because these days you don't have to hand them a DVD anymore. You just say, go stream it off of, whatever streaming source you want, because it's out there. The reality is that the burden of leadership that General Savage took on in this situation darn near killed him. But it's so poignant in the way that you would think that that wasn't the case until you watch to the very end. You would think that this was just one tough guy that just went in here and ground it out with these guys. But if you really then pay attention to how it all played out, that wasn't his nature at all. And he had to put on that nature during that period of time in order to be successful. And so what that caused for me, and why that story is relevant, is it caused me to understand there were times when I had to step away from my desire to be liked by everybody, to be a congenial, that I had to hold people accountable, that I had to occasionally be able to do what I call draw the sword. Leadership isn't, it's not easy, and it's not always even nice. And that was hard for me to accept, because it just wasn't, my standard MO. My standard MO was, hey, let's have fun, let's go do this, let's tackle this. It's going to be hard, but we'll all get through it and come right. But there are and were times in my career where I had to change my nature and literally put on a persona of, we're going to get this done or else, or your accountability, as one of my team, is that if this isn't working for you to change your ways and to be adaptable to these circumstances, to hold your team accountable, then we're going to have a different conversation, and it's going to lead to a different outcome, and one that you're probably not going to like. And so there's a hard part of this, Tom, and it was particularly hard for me, and it was particularly hard for General Savage to realize that situationally, sometimes the stakes are high enough, and the rest of the team's well-being is at stake, that you have to drive home hard bargains. And so I think we'd be remiss if we were looking at the science of this and not realize that sometimes leadership requires hard decisions, hard choices, and holding people accountable in ways that they won't be comfortable with, and they won't particularly appreciate the way you're going about it. possibly until they see the end result, which is the punchline of the movie. So highly recommend it. It's not just Fred's idea and Rob's idea of a great management lesson. They use it at West Point to teach leadership characteristics. And I think if you wade through it, you'll actually enjoy the movie for one thing, but you'll also learn something about what it takes and what that burden of leadership can cost.
Rob, thanks for the recommendation on that movie. Certainly, hopefully, we'll put a reference in the show notes for listeners, but something everybody can get out there and watch and enjoy.